Now I have to introduce our next speaker, who is going to talk about his book just recently published, which you can buy with a discount if you get the flyer at the book table, and you can scan the QR code and buy the book. It's called What Science Says About Astrology. It's actually by, it was by the cakes. If you saw the cakes, you can see the flyer. It's not by chance, people. If you don't get the book, no cake for you. That's how it works. So I'll be going around later. You can show me some receipts. Okay, so Carlos Orsi is the author of that book that you are going to buy now. Yeah, and he is an award-winning writer and a science journalist. He has books, articles, and short stories published in Brazil, the US, Canada, Argentina, and the UK. He writes about science. He also writes mystery and science fiction. And he has more than 30 years experience as a science journalist and a science editor. He has worked for several of the largest media groups in Brazil as a science editor. He has also authored several books on the popularization of science, including some that he co-authored with me. And maybe some of you don't know, but he is also my husband. So co-authoring books with me is nothing compared to living with me. And he can do both. So one of the books we wrote together, actually the first book we wrote together, was called Science in Our Daily Lives. And that one won the Brazilian National Book Award. And we wrote, thank you. And the third book we wrote together was called What Nonsense? And it actually became a bestseller in Brazil, and it's a book on pseudoscience. So we were very surprised because those books don't often become bestsellers, but somehow we did it. So he's here today to talk about his most recent book, What Science Says About Astrology, which is part of a book series that we are launching together with Stuart Firestein, who is sitting over there. So the three of us are launching this book series with Columbia University Press called What Science Says. So this is the first book, What Science Says About Astrology. And Carlos is going to talk a little bit about the book tonight. One personal anecdote about the book, and Carlos, because he's my husband, so I'm allowed to tell you. During the pandemic in Brazil, we were doing a lot of work trying to explain the pandemic to people and vaccines. And I'm a microbiologist and a vaccine expert, so in Brazil, I became the main spokesperson especially for COVID vaccines. So when we launched the first book in Brazil, the first that got the award, I was kind of a science celebrity. And when they announced the winner of the National Book Award, it was on TV because we were on kind of a lockdown in Brazil, so there wasn't an actual ceremony. It was all done on TV. And the journalist, when she announced the book, she said that the best science book was going to Dr. Pasternak and her husband. So this became like a sore point for us and a regular joke. But I'm happy to tell you now that the astrology book is getting so much media attention. It has just come out, and he's already doing a lot of interviews. He got an interview with NPR. He was on The Atlantic, and one of the podcasts of The Atlantic, David Frum, selected his book as Book of the Week to comment about it. So he's the one getting all the attention now, and I'm very, very happy to just stay in your shadow now and just be the wife. So please, everyone, welcome Carlos Orsi, my husband.
Okay. That was nice. I can pay you later, right? The fee we agreed on. Yeah, okay. So she just gave up the game, right? I'm here to try to convince you to buy my book. But
Oh, I did that already.
Yeah. But okay, this is a convention of teachers, professors of critical thinking with a refutational approach. So I'm trying to convince you that astrology in general, and my book in particular, can be a very good tool, a very good, I could say, experimental animal for the teaching of critical thinking. And I say that because astrology, as I found out while researching and writing my book, can work in two ways. As a cautionary tale, first way, as a cautionary tale of how good intentions and at first, uh, at first shock at least, good ideas, good hypotheses can really, really go astray. Well, when astrology had some very good things going for it 3,000 years ago when it all began in Babylon and Mesopotamia. What was going well for astrology? First, it's separated from religion. It started as a kind of religious enterprise, as a way the planets and stars were signs of the gods or the gods themselves, and people were just looking at things at the sky as if they were messages from the gods. And at the beginning, people didn't have really a good idea of what was an atmospheric phenomenon or what was an astronomical phenomenon. So a planet, a comet, a flock of birds, a weird shaped cloud, it was all the same thing. But with time, and it took centuries, people started, the Babylonian priests, they started noticing that unlike flocks of birds and clouds, astronomical objects had very strong regularities. The same stars would appear at the same times of night, at the same times of the year. The planets had their own trajectories. And because of that, it started separating from this arbitrary reading of the intentions of the gods. It became a thing into itself. Because of that, they started doing a lot of very serious data collection. I mean, the Babylonians, if you go to the libraries of cuneiform tablets and all that, they have centuries and centuries of observations of the sky. Tonight, we saw that and that star at that and that time, and the moon was like that. There is one author of an astrology book that I won't remember his name now, sorry, that wrote that he's a data scientist that wrote a book on astrology from this perspective, that the astrological records of Babylon are the longest data collecting project of natural phenomena ever attempted by humankind, because it lasts for centuries. That's a whole civilization until they were conquered by Alexander and all that. And it permitted that they recognize some associations and correlations that weren't spurious. I mean, you can predict the seasons of the year by watching the sky. You can predict with some sort of competence floods if they are regular. You can predict not because the stars cause it, because the stars mark times of the year when certain things happen and don't happen. So astrology had something good going for it. It was okay. It was a data collecting process. It was a process of trying to associate natural data with earthly phenomena, and it was apart from religion. It wasn't the gods. It was nature doing its own thing. But then things started going wrong. They had no system, no philosophy, no scheme to separate the good associations, the valid ones, from the spurious. So they started saying, okay, so since the stars tell us when summer will start, they also can tell us when a child will be born, who will be king. No, not really, but I mean, if you associate the one, you associate the other, and they didn't have statistics, and everything started piling up. Because of that, confirmation bias went rampant. I mean, Steve talked us about confirmation bias, and it was very strong, a very strong factor in astrology, taking the shape it has today. And one thing very perverse about confirmation bias is that it can really reinforce prejudices. I mean, one of the funniest things about, there is this Tamsin Brown, it's Brown, I don't remember her last name correctly, but she is a historian who wrote Astrology in the Ancient World. And one of the things she says is that you can learn a lot about the prejudices of past societies by saying what kinds of behaviors and what kinds of people, appearances, and all that were associated with bad astrological configurations. For traditional reasons, everything in the sky that has a right angle, it's a square, it's a right triangle, so is bad. So they say, okay, so you go to the Roman Empire and you see the kind of people they said would be born under a right angle association. Okay, these are the people they despised at that point in time. So it's a very interesting study. And it can be very, I don't know how they'll say that, very nationalistic in a way, because if you go to Ptolemy, Claudius Ptolemy was the great Greek Egyptian astronomer. He was the guy who organized the geocentric universe with the Earth at the center and everything else running around. And he wrote the fundamental text of Western astrology, the Tetrabiblos. And one of the things that he says in the Tetrabiblos is that depending on the latitude people are born, of the stars they will have different, the peoples born in these different zones of the Earth will have different characteristics. And okay, have in mind that Ptolemy lived in Alexandria, in Egypt, so he was in the Mediterranean. And what did he say? He said that people who lived north from the Mediterranean, they will have some ugly, very clear white skin, and they lived in very cold climates. And of course, with that kind of climate that was very cold, you couldn't have a decent civilization, right? They were all barbarians. And he said of the people who lived south of the Mediterranean, that they had this weird dark skin, and it was so hot that they also couldn't have a decent civilization. That the only civilized people possible in the world were the people that lived in his short strip of the ancient world. So I see this kind of stuff really gets into people's heads and creates habits and creates beliefs. Then other thing that went wrong with astrology, it got into a very close association with political power and political interests. And that's another social phenomenon of astrology that is very curious. When Rome was a republic and you had very stable rules, you had the Senate and the senators did their voting and all that, most of the divination in Rome was made by priests with those things of sacrificing a bird and looking into its intestines and things like that. When the republic ends and you get the empire, and the empire you didn't have rules, the military could depose an emperor and put another emperor in its place. The emperor himself had the power of life and death over anyone. He could say, "Oh, kill that guy," and people would there and do that. Astrology becomes a very big thing. Everyone wanted a horoscope to have the feel. Of course, they didn't have the real information, but just to minimize their sense of uncertainty. And there are few emperors that would have sort of astrological hit squads. If some noble, some wealthy person had an horoscope that suggested a grandeur or glory or something, okay, this guy may be the next emperor, so they would preventively order his murder. I mean, it was a thing. And as a matter of fact, it became a crime in Rome to make the horoscope of the emperor. One of the things that August, the first emperor, did to show how certain he was of his power was to publish his own horoscope. He said, "See, I have nothing to hide. I'm not afraid of anybody or anything." So that's the first way in which I believe astrology can be a very nice tool to teaching critical thinking, showing how a project that had very strong things going for itself, observation of nature, collecting data, correlating data with phenomena, can really go off the tracks and go wrong if you don't take the, the precautions that you are teaching to your students at the end. The second way that astrology can be a very good didactic, pedagogical tool is a living example of the power of another thing that Steve mentioned, of the Barnum effect and of confirmation bias. I mean, everybody knows of the Barnum effect and the experiment of giving the same horoscope to all the students and all that. But one thing that is very, not very often remembered is that Bertrand Fodor, the psychologist who did this experiment for the first time, he used statements taken from horoscopes. But he presented the report, the profile he gave his students, as a psychological profile. And the paper he published with his results wasn't a paper on astrology. It was a paper alerting clinical psychologists not to take too seriously when their patients told them how great their therapy was. That was the gist of Fodor's work. So he was commenting on clinical psychology. He wasn't commenting on astrology, but he found astrology as a very nice didactical example. So, I'll give you an example. I don't know if everyone here is familiar with the Barnum effect, but it's something that works when what is said is very generic, but the reception, when it's heard, it sounds very personal. My favorite Barnum statement is one that Fodor used in his original paper. Is something that goes like, you have potentialities and capabilities that you weren't able to use in your favor so far. I mean, it's true for everybody, right? But it's true for everyone in a different way. Your unused capacity may be music. Mine could be stand-up comedy. I guess not, right? I mean, but whatever. So I think that astrology can be a very good tool in the teaching of critical thinking. And I will conclude with giving a recent example that happened in Brazil. Last week, there was one of the biggest newspapers in the country, I think the second most important newspaper, our Washington Post, so to say, published a story on the Brazilian soccer team because World Cup, right? I don't know if you Americans are aware that it's happening here this year, but it is. So they made they checked the astrological signs of the 26 players that were called to make the Brazilian national team for the World Cup. And they noticed that 4 of the players were from Sagittarius and 4 were from Cancer, if I'm not mistaken. And they did a whole, wow, why these 2 signs and da 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 da. So I read the story and then I asked ChatGPT to do my homework because, right, that's what people do nowadays, and do some binomial distribution, da da da. And ChatGPT told me that if you try to get 26 people into 12 categories randomly, you can expect to have 1 to 4 persons in each category. So, okay, 2 signs with 4 players is totally random. But the people who read the story probably wasn't aware of that. So, well, I think that's my pitch. So if you think that using astrology as a pedagogical tool could be a good idea, the book is there. You can have 20% discount using the QR code. And thank you. Have a good conference.